All right, hi again. This is going to be part 3 of the Arabia 111 incident. The decision to continue takeoff. So if you read the report or not, at around 55 knots, the FO realizes something's wrong. They get the wrong FMA announcement and calls out that something's wrong. The captain looks at the FMA and realizes pretty quickly that what had happened, that he's now taken off in the wrong direction. But what he does now is quite amazing. He decides to continue to take off. He takes over the flight and starts flying solo, pushes the throttles to max thrust, selects the next level of flaps. He lowers the flap level from position 1 to position 2 and continues the takeoff. According to the data analyzed by the investigators and Airbus, this is a seriously wrong decision. They had no problem stopping on the runway in case of rejected takeoff. What happened eventually, by the way, is that they damaged the runway, the threshold lights, I think, on the other side of the runway. And they took off basically 30 to 50 meters after the runway end and continued the flight for takeoff. Sounds crazy, but it's not really. I mean, the guy was caught off guard. His perception of reality was proven completely false. The aircraft is accelerating for takeoff, and what do you do? So the report analyzes correctly and addresses low energy part of the takeoff versus the high energy part of the takeoff. That is nice words of saying below 80 knots on Boeing airplanes and below 100 knots on Airbus airplanes. And at the low energy part, your mindset is stop. On the high energy part, your mindset is go. And this captain decided on a go when it was about 60 knots. 60 knots, I think I've seen some EasyJet and Ryanair pilots taxi at 60 knots. It's slightly above taxi speed. So, but then again, I mean, everything you've taught is not relevant now, right? Because all your takeoff calculations are based on what you thought you were going to take off on. So now everything is irrelevant. The runway is much shortened, and this captain decided that it's a safer course of action to continue the takeoff rather than abort the takeoff. The report mentions startle effect, and the report is right. What do you do when you get scared? What do you do when you get startled? And this goes deeply into decision making. And if you know theory of the aviation decision making, it's basically divided into 3 types based on the time available. If you have really long time and if you're stuck in cruise or in the middle of the ocean, something goes wrong, there's a structured decision making process that most airlines, I think, have adopted, because not every captain was born a great decision maker. And they have these structured decision making processes like foredeck, decide, page. And this is when you have a really available time. If you have somewhat of urgency, usually you will go straight ahead to a checklist. The checklist is a tool which helps analyze, stop the situation from deteriorating, and then you're left alone with the decision. The checklist is not going to decide for you. So once again, you will probably go to a decision-making process, either the full or a shortened one. But what happens when you have no time? I mean, during takeoff run, you have no time to decide. And this guy had no time to decide. I mean, not only was he at 60 knots, he was at 60 knots on an undiagnosed runway, completely out of what he has planned. And now he's faced with a decision. Should I take off or should I abort? Tough spot to be in. Analysis shows that the decision or his decision was wrong. It was much safer to stop than to go. And I think one should expect this to be the decision. This is mostly based on the point in time and the speed where they realized that something was wrong. The stop and go switch of mindset. And you should always aviate, navigate, communicate. So in terms of aviation, stick to what you know. Most of us never thought if we say before every takeoff that we should abort the takeoff for engine failure, fire, smoke, and unsafe for flight, how many of us actually thought about what unsafe for flight means? I mean, does a phone call from the cabin constitute unsafe for flight? How about 7 calls from the flight from the cabin? How about 1 hit to the airplane? How about 4 hits to the airplane? How many of us actually thought what unsafe for flight means? This is one aspect of this, but the idea here is to be ready for no time decision making cases and ready-made reactions. I still do not think that anyone can be ready for such a start effect. I mean, when I sit down and I think about what unsafe for flight means, I never thought I would find myself taking off in the wrong direction. So one would expect, if you don't know what happened, stick to what you do know. And what you do know is unsafe for flight below 80 or 100 knots, reject the takeoff. Interesting case, lots to learn. Hope you enjoyed these videos, and I will see you next time. Thank you.